Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the show. I decided to do another short video because, some people don't realize how it's important to have an emergency plan, not for earthquakes, but an emergency plan with your parents. As we get older, our parents are older too. So for those of you who are fortunate enough to have older or elderly parents, you need to have an emergency plan in place just in case something goes wrong. And I'll tell you what happened recently to someone I know, where in the middle of the night they got a phone call around 3 a.m. from their parent, and their parent could not breathe. Okay, that's a phone call you don't want to have, because most of us don't live with our parents anymore. Some of us live overseas in different countries, some live in different cities. So you need to have a backup plan, okay? And what does that mean? One, you need to have a plan in case your parent has an emergency. Don't wait for the emergency to happen and start to develop a plan. So this example I gave you of someone's parent calling them at 3 a.m. in the night and not being able to breathe, a lot of things had to happen to save that parent's life. Because this parent was in the village, this parent could not drive, their spouse also could not drive. It was unclear if the neighbors were around and if they had a car. There was no 911 to call an ambulance, and so all this was happening pitch dark. And so if you don't have a backup plan, if this happens to you, the outcome may not be as fortunate. So I have a 5-step plan that I hope you can pay attention to and listen to. And if you find this video helpful, share it. But I have a 5-step plan of things you should do now before the emergency actually happens. The first thing you have to do is check on your parents regularly. You need to check on them every week, because a lot happens as they get older. As one older patient told me, you get to a certain age, your body starts to fall apart. And so the way your parent, your dad or your mom feels now will be different from how they'll feel in 2 weeks. So check on them and ask them how they're doing. Parents are not good at telling you what's wrong, because they'll tell you, I don't want to bother you, I don't want to worry you. So ask them, be active and say, what's bothering you? Anything new going on? Any health problems? You have to ask them and tell them it's okay to talk to you. And that way you can know what's going on, because to be informed is better than not to be informed at all. Okay? Number 2, know their medical history. Know if they have high blood pressure, if they have diabetes. If their blood pressure is well controlled, you need to know. So I'm going to ask you now, what's your dad's blood pressure? Tell me if you know it. What's your mom's blood sugar? Do you know it? If you're diabetic, what's their A1C? How well controlled are they? You need to know what medications your parents take. Does your parent need to be on an aspirin? So, because some people need to be on an aspirin to prevent heart disease, or not. So those are little pieces of information that you as a child has to know. Also, you need to know when their last checkup was. Ideally, they should be seeing their doctor once a year, maybe more often, depending on how sick they are. So those are things you need to know. Know what medications they're taking, know how well controlled their diseases are, know when their last checkup was. Number 3, make sure they can reach you at any time. So this person's dad called him at 3 a.m. and couldn't breathe. Can you imagine if he didn't pick up the phone call? So, I now understand why people have a different ringtone for their parents. So if that ringtone goes off, they pick it up and they don't just turn it off without listening. Because if he didn't pick up the phone, his dad could have died that night. So have a direct means of communication, either by phone call, text during the day, or WhatsApp messaging or Facebook messaging. But always make sure your parents have credit. Always make sure they have credit if you can afford it, so they can reach you. So if there's an emergency, they don't think twice about getting a hold of you. Number 4, have a phone number of an emergency contact. So this my person I'm telling you about. At 3 a.m., his father could not breathe. They had no phone number of the neighbors. They had family relatives about 20 minutes away, which is too far in the case of an emergency. So you need to have an emergency contact. So if your dad lives somewhere or your parents live somewhere, make an active effort to find out who their neighbor is. Say hi to them, call them once in a while, have their phone number, Because if emergencies happen at night, they're the ones you're going to be calling. Okay, and have that discussion with them. My dad is 80, 85. There may be an emergency. Would it be okay if we call you in case of an emergency? Have that situation settled and discussed. In many parts of the world, people don't have a clue who their neighbors are, but you need to know who your parents' neighbors are, just in case of an emergency. You need to know if they have a car or not. If your parents can't drive, you need to have some emergency contact who can come pick them up under short notice and take them to the hospital if they need to. Okay, hopefully this doesn't happen, but it's better to have a plan than not to have a plan. And number 5, have an emergency plan. Have money stashed somewhere. Have aspirin in the house in case they have a heart attack. Have an inhaler in case they're asthmatic. If they're diabetic, do you have insulin, or do you have some kind of sugar to help raise their blood glucose up if their blood sugar is low? Have the phone number and the contact information of the nearest hospital. Because when that call came in at 3 a.m., they weren't sure if the neighbors were home. They weren't sure where to carry the patient to, if to carry him 1 hour away or to the nearest hospital. So you need to have all these things in place and communicate it with your parents. And I hope that nothing happens to your parents. But please, please, please do these 5 things that I've talked about. 1, check on your parents regularly and ask them proactively if anything is bothering them, so they do use the "I don't want to disturb you" line on you. 2, make sure you know what diseases they have, what medications they have. Make sure you know if they're well controlled. Make sure you know when their last checkup was with their doctor and when their next checkup is going to be. Make sure they have a way, that's number 3 now, make sure they have a way to reach you either by phone. Create a unique ringtone for them. So if that phone call goes off at night, you know there's something going on and you can take action. Number 4, have a phone number of the emergency contact, someone who lives close to them, because sometimes the parent can fall on the ground and break a hip and can't walk, right? And you can say, please go check on my parent. Here in the US, some people have a button, an emergency button that the person can press, and they get emergency services, 911, brought over. But in many parts of the world, those services don't exist. So you need to have the contact information of an emergency contact who's nearby and keep in touch with them. So it's not like when there's an emergency, that's the first time you're hearing from them. Number 5, have a backup plan, an emergency plan. Have money somewhere, have the necessary aspirin, inhaler, know the nearby hospital and their phone number so you can call if it's an emergency. And hopefully this will save a life, or better still, not happen at all, but you have a plan in place, and this will give you the confidence and you will not have to go through what my friend went through recently. If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to subscribe by clicking the button below. Share it so people know what's going on. My name is Dr. Phil. Have a good day.